Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your panel on Bank on It, companies that are changing the rules and the world, moderated by LinkedIn's managing news editor, Caroline Fairchild.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of Milken. My name is Caroline Fairchild. I'm a managing editor at LinkedIn. We have a global team of editors making sure that the news and views in your feed are accurate and relevant for your industries. We actually have a great conversation going on about this very conference on LinkedIn right now. We encourage you to share and check out the insights from your fellow attendees using hashtag #MIGlobal. All right, to the matter at hand. Let's see here. The Amazon of South Korea, the Carvana of Europe, let's see over here, the Uber of Singapore, and the Airbnb of India. This is how my counterparts in the media have portrayed these companies in the press, and we are going beyond the headlines here today to actually tell you about what these leaders are doing within their markets and how it's not as simple as saying that they're taking these companies and what's going on in Silicon Valley and replicating them elsewhere, because what they're doing is disruptive, it's different, and it's not like their counterparts here in Silicon Valley. So I'm encouraging us all to really get in the weeds here so that we leave this discussion with a better understanding of the nuance behind these massive markets that each of these leaders is talking about and leading through their companies. So I'm going to start, and I want each of my panelists to explain in one sentence only, I know it's hard sometimes, what they believe to be the biggest misconception about the e-commerce, ride-sharing, and hospitality markets in their home country, respectively. Bom, I'm going to make you my first victim.
I don't think the problem statements are usually the same. The needs of the customers are the same. I think in our case, the biggest misconception is, one, that the solution will be the same to those problems. And second of all, we're based in Korea, and one of the biggest misconceptions about Korea is that it's a small market. It's the 5th largest e-commerce market in the world, actually on pace to be the 3rd largest e-commerce market in the world after the US, after China and the US.
Hakan?
Yeah, so we operate all across continental Europe, and we have a platform that buys and sells used cars from many channels to many channels. And I think what is underestimated is the size of transactions, the number of transactions, size of the market. In a developed market like Central Europe, the used car transactions are actually 3 times higher than new car transactions. So it's a lot more liquid. And also the unit economics are better than selling new cars. So we see much more and more retailers shifting towards new cars, from new cars to used cars.
Ming?
First of all, thank you for having me here. I think the biggest misconception is that we are the Uber of Southeast Asia. The better analogy to think through is the Uber plus and financial plus Meituan of the region. And it's because the problems that we're solving expand and extend so much beyond mobility into financial inclusion, capital formation, and all of these combined together as a platform is where we're heading over the next 5 years.
Abhinav?
Thank you for having me here. The biggest misconception for Oyo is that we are a distribution-centered business, whereas what we really are is more of a fulfillment-centered business. So we really are more about upgrading the hotels, helping operate the hotels, and then comes the fine layer of distribution. So that's a very key misconception which we face almost everywhere we go.
And as we dive more into the misconceptions, I just want to take a quick poll, make sure everyone's still alive in the audience here. So who here has heard of Grab? Cool. All right. What about Oyo? Okay. Coupang? Auto One. All right. Not a lot of hands for a lot of those companies. So I think what would be great is if each of you could just give us the high-level landscape of the market and kind of the disruption and really the massive size of each of your businesses, so that's appreciated before we dive in. Bom.
Sure. We are the largest e-commerce platform in Korea. Actually, I think we're the largest private fulfillment e-commerce company in the world. We're growing we're about a $11 billion run rate. growing 65% year over year right now. We have essentially built out an Amazon-like fulfillment network, but on top of that, because the country doesn't have a UPS-like infrastructure, we built out the UPS of the country as well. So we have the largest directly controlled delivery fleet in the country as well. So it's an end-to-end, from the mobile click all the way to your door delivery, integrated e-commerce platform. In addition to that, we've also launched a payment platform, much like PayPal, that's doing about an $8 billion run rate, growing over 200% year over year. So also building out an financial-like business. And also entered food delivery, leveraging our logistics capabilities as well. So really a consumer internet platform in the market.
Great. Hakan?
Yeah, I can already see a red line here where we have things in common. So we are the biggest market maker in Europe. Last year we traded over 540,000 cars. We solved two problems. Yeah? One is a consumer wants to sell their car. There must be an efficient e-commerce-like way to do it, online to offline, but really the click of a button, booking your appointment, going there and on the spot, solving the customer's core problem. And the second problem that we're solving is on the B2B end, where car dealers need supply. Yeah? When you drive by car dealerships, you always take for granted that the lots are filled and say, hey, great, they've got this great inventory. But if on a good Saturday they sell 10 cars, guess what? On a Monday they need to get 10 more cars to have this reach again and put them on the market. And on the back of this, based on our own needs, we have also built one of the biggest logistics players in finished vehicle logistics. We do over 1 million car movements a year, opening the network now also for our partners, in the future for even more players. And of course, finance is a topic that also comes up when you say, okay, how can we make lending easier, perhaps to people who do not have the visibility in their credit scores, with smaller dealerships, new startups in that company, in our industry, how can we help them? And we also lend to them.
Great.
I think for Grab, the best way to think about Grab is to compare and contrast the market in the US with the market in Southeast Asia. And I think when you look at US startups, there is a singular focus on a one-size-fits-all approach. So the notion of providing a service that wins the heart of a millennial living in San Francisco, if you're able to develop a service that wins their heart, then the assumption is that you'll be able to win the hearts of the middle-class American in middle America. And so it's a one-size, single playbook. I think what we found is Southeast Asia is incredibly heterogeneous. On one extreme, you have the crazy rich Asians of Singapore, and on the other extreme, you have who wants to be a millionaire. And so the demographics are quite large and quite disparate. And what that means is there has to be a very specific and intentional hyper-focus on being very, very localized. Some examples. When you talk to the consumer in Southeast Asia, in countries like Philippines or Thailand, more consumers travel by a motorcycle or these three-wheel tuk-tuks than they do by car. And so if you're a ride-sharing business in the US, the general approach is to try and form-fit everyone and move them into a four-wheel vehicle. The approach that we took was to really work within the consumer behavior of our demographic and then hyper-localize the service to fit the demographic needs of our consumer. And that's been the general approach that we take on hyper-localizing the services and the products for our customers.
And the size of Grab's business, can you talk a little bit about that? I know it's really small, which is why you probably avoided it. But
No, so last year, we became the first technology company to hit over $1 billion of revenue in the region. And what's been extremely notable is not just the growth in ride sharing, but then all of the other services that we've developed on top of that, which includes food delivery, mobile payments, financial services, and we see tremendous growth in those underserved markets.
yeah, and we'll get to that, I'm sure, later. Okay, Abhinav.
So we are a technology company that happens to be in hospitality. We run more than 650,000 rooms across the globe as we speak, across 19 countries. And we are adding about 60,000 rooms every month, which by far we are the fastest growing hotel chain across the globe. We are the #1 in India, we are #3 in China, and we have presence in multiple other countries where we would be in the top 5 in most countries that we operate in and very early stages of growth. Beyond this, we are also the #1 vacation rentals player in India. And it's a full stack model where we not only go in and provide the brand, so all these hotels have the Oyo brand, multiple brands, but Oyo brand, but we also provide the fulfillment support, so all of the hotels run on our technology. We own the pricing, revenue management, and distribution. And most importantly, we take decisions on how you upgrade the asset, what investments go in, how repair and maintenance happen on the asset. So it's a very deep stack business on the fulfillment side, and which is growing at scale. So that's the most interesting part for us.
Great. So massive markets, massive companies, massive opportunities for disruption. Let's get into how you did it and how you succeeded in getting this big and what's next to come. Bom, I want to start with you because when we first talked about this, you equated, maybe the better word is disequated, what you're doing at Coupang with early versions of planes which had flapping wings. Can you let the audience know kind of what you were talking about there?
I think if I were sitting in the audience here listening in, I would say, this is what we're doing in a nutshell. A lot of times when people, early models of man, this is what I was telling Caroline, and this is not my analogy, it's something that I read in the Innovator's Dilemma, actually. Early models of man, a lot of early technology innovation came as a result of observing nature. So birds flapped their wings to get lift. Early models of man also had planes that flapped and tried to generate lift that way. But the reality is that steel wings have different constraints. So the way that you generate lift with steel wings is very different from the way that birds generate lift. And it's the same thing here. I think fundamentally the forces of consumers are the same. People want more selection, lower prices, more immediate gratification. And whether it's hospitality or auto sales or internet e-commerce, customers want the same things in every market. But the constraints in each market are very different. And the way you solve the solutions around those constraints will be very different. So in our case, fast delivery, does that look like Amazon's fast delivery? It does not. Because consumers in Korea have very different lifestyles. They typically work very late. The average elementary student, and this is depressing for my kids, comes back from school and after-school classes at 10 p.m. 10 p.m. So the typical consumer, whether you're a working mom or dad or a kid, it really has downtime after 10 p.m. So the way that we solved for fast delivery was figuring out how to get fast delivery for people who are ordering in the middle of the night. In the middle of the night. So now we have over 40 times Walmart selection that can be delivered within hours, not only during the day, but overnight. If you place an order at midnight, you'll get it before 7 a.m. in the morning. And that's, it was a difficult problem, difficult constraint for us to work around, but I think as a result of really customizing our solutions around the constraints in the market to fulfill universal needs, we built something, I think, that's really unique, and that's what's behind our growth.
And Ming, you spoke a little bit earlier about the constraints in Southeast Asia, given the localized demographics and how they vary from country to country. What's your example of, the poor kids who are going to school until 10 p.m. in South Korea?
So just to build on Bom's point about constraints, I think there is often a notion that you can't have it all. It has to be either price or service. And one of the biggest constraints that we see, particularly from US startups, is the notion of a customer is a customer that's very narrowly defined. It's a customer that buys goods on e-commerce. It's a customer that buys a used car, or it's a customer that rents a room for the night. The way that we approach the market is the customer that we're going after is a digital-first, mobile-first consumer. And what that means is the way that we engage with our customers is quite much broader than simply selling or providing a singular product and service to our customers. Which is why when we launched this journey, we focused on the notion of a super app platform, where if you're able to provide the most relevant services to your customers on a daily basis, and within Grab, we have a saying that high frequency will always kill low frequency. High-frequency services create habituation. It creates behavior changes. And if you're able to create a portfolio of services that provides the most relevant daily services to our customers in their mobile life, then your share of wallet, share of mind share, heart share continues to grow over time. And the way that you're able to engage with your customers then becomes much deeper, much more holistic than selling, XYZ products. And I think that notion of creating a super app platform to enable that behavior change is what we've been very much focused on.
And Hakan, you started Auto One with your co-founder and co-CEO, as you pointed out before we got on stage, when there were other players in the market. What did you do differently that you think really made you stand out and be in the position that you are today as the leader?
I think, the first 1.5 years we were a German-only company, and there was really about digital experience in an industry that was not so digital in 2012. So if I wanted to sell my car, and we tried it out, so we tried to sell a car, and were calling around dealerships and just seeing what happens, and was a not so good experience, if they ever answered the phone, or a fax machine answered the phone, or a lot of funny things happened, but at the end of the day, we couldn't understand it because we were e-commerce people. We're not coming from the car industry, we're coming from an industry where we said there needs to be a toll-free hotline, there needs to be a ticketing system, there needs to be response time, there needs to be service levels, all of this that you learn when you say customer first, customer first, customer first, and then you say, hey, I want to try this super expensive good that is mostly in the European countries the most expensive good people own because they rent, they don't have so many real estate properties statistically. So I'm selling my most expensive good and nobody wants to transact. And that was, that got us really interested. And the market is huge. We're talking about hundreds of billions of euros. Why aren't people answering the phone? So okay, we started with a website and said, you must be able to have a very guided funnel so that everybody who's also not an expert can actually assess the value of their car. And when they want to go on and transact with us, 24/7, your shop must be open. So if you, and that's my favorite example, we do a lot of TV ads around NFL. So NFL means in Germany that's 3 a.m. on a Sunday because of the time difference. We must be able to offer you an appointment at 3 a.m. when you watch NFL and say, yeah, right, I want to sell my car. That next Monday morning at 9 a.m. you can book a slot and you don't just send out an email and wait for an answer and hope that they get it. It must be a live booking system where you immediately get a response, where somebody follows up, where you get a text message and says, we are really happy and we want you here and this is what will happen. And then transparency. That's the next step where you say, it shouldn't depend on you as a person if you will sell, how you will sell, and which price you will get for your car. Because that's not, we're pricing the car, right? So we have a very digital, industrialized process when we do this thousands and thousands of times a day, where we digitalize your car. We take an iPad, we do the test drive, we have underbody scanners that have AI that analyze the picture, and we've looked at millions of cars. We know exactly what is relevant these days. And that was the, if you want, so national level. That already solved a lot. That was already a hyper-growing company. And then after 1.5 years, we said, okay, we are a European company. And now looking back, one of the investors once told me, you're an EU poster child. Now why? We have freedom of goods, we have freedom of services, we have freedom of capital, and we are one of the few companies that can really leverage on this. We can buy in any country in the EU and sell in any country of the EU. So now all of a sudden you take a very, very local market and expand it to all the borders of the EU that you can imagine. And there is so much potential to drive the prices or the highest price to the customer that we're really successful in making the customer happy, and we do mystery shopping, beating the market. That's our benchmark. What do you get locally? If you get on average 20% more from us, then that is driven by technology. That is driven by the fact that we connect the market end to end, that you can drive to a branch in Barcelona and there might be a buyer in Helsinki, but you don't actually have to drive there, thank God, but you can transact with us.
Can I make a quick comment?
Of course.
So I think what's interesting, just what Ming just said. Ming said you can't have it all. I think actually Grab is trying to create a world that can have it all. and I think Auto One is too. I actually think we have a motto. Our slogan from the early days of the company, even when we had a very different business model, was create a world where customers ask this one question, which is, how did I ever live without Coupang? Which means this: we believe there are two types of companies. A type of company that creates just kind of incrementally better services or products, or a company that creates such exponentially better value to the customers that customers say, how did I ever live without this? And we believe, and I think this common thing that I'm hearing from both of these two gentlemen here, is that technology allows us to break the trade-offs that typically we take for granted in our world, and that's how you get exponential value. Or greater value. So for example, you get a marketplace like Auto One, and you get, now all of a sudden, your shopping selection expands across borders, and you have the convenience of ordering, booking a car while you're watching something on TV. But the typical trade-off there is that you lose trust, visibility, there's no transparency, and you've broken that. Same thing with a lot of the things that Grab has done. And we feel the same way. For us, the trade-off is that, yes, people want that immediacy and want the delivery within hours, but typically in the US, I think, if you get delivery within hours, you have to trade off with selection. So a typical Prime Now store has about 30,000 items on average, I believe. So when you want something within hours, you give up selection. If you want full selection, you have to wait. The way we try to break it is by integrating end-to-end, now we have over 2 million items that can be delivered within hours. And of course, if you are willing to wait longer, a day, up to a day, you get millions more. But I think that's the common thread that I hear here, is that when you find the constraints and you find those trade-offs, how do you break it with technology? I don't know if I'm representing your company accurately.
I love it, and I think even if you want to visualize it, when you look at the headquarters, and it will be the same for every company here, we have only one line of water going into the building. And if water wouldn't work for a day, we could live. We have 3 fiber lines at different corners of the block. If somebody tears the street open and internet is down, we have 2 more uplinks. And I think that shows a little bit where is the emphasis. What could people live without and what couldn't they? We can drink water from bottles and we'll survive 24 hours. No internet will be really tough for our organization.
Right. All right, I want to bring Abhinav into this conversation. So Abhinav, a lot of people might think of Oyo and be like, oh, it's Airbnb in India, but the model is very different. So let's talk a little bit about the model, why it worked for you in India and the other markets that you're exploring.
Sure. So before we start, let me share that India today, as we build the business, is about a third of the business for us. So the model definitely has gone beyond the boundaries and is scaling in other places as well. The model fundamentally is built on a very important fact. 90% of hotel rooms worldwide are part of assets which are 100 rooms or smaller in size. These are small buildings. And historically, a lot of the hotels that this panel and a lot of us are trained to see are basically the large buildings, 200, 250 rooms and larger in size. And historically, a large portion of this 100-room and lower buildings, these hotels continue to be fragmented, independently owned across the world. Now, as a hotelier who owns the asset and is running this hotel, you don't have the right tools that you need to run the show. So you do not know how to do pricing and revenue management, you don't know how to build content, you don't have the right technology to run the show, it's a small hotel, and you do not know how to invest in the asset to get more returns from your money. So there are tons of problems that this hotelier faces. So this is, Oyo goes in, and we are the franchising brand for these small hotels. And we have used technology, again, to break the barriers of how would you make a small asset operate as efficiently as a larger asset. So you basically use technology to figure out how you overcome the barriers that traditionally existed because of which these smaller assets were not seen and not part of the main economy. And as we do that, we have improved our capabilities, and it's a deep fulfillment level capability where globally now we operate in about 700 cities across the globe, where we can sit across the table with an asset owner and we can do a deal in 3 meetings, because the decision making is all enabled on an app with all the data streaming in, because at the end of the day, the decision is based on data coming in, signals coming in. You have a team which goes in and transforms the assets and upgrades the asset, which also uses technology to make decisions. And the decision is to optimize capital versus the look and feel of the asset, which versus the return that you will deliver on the asset. Technology, we have all mobile technology, which you can use to basically operate the hotel and run the hotel. And finally comes distribution. So Airbnb is a great partner, and we really respect what they have built. The solution works really well when there are no underlying fulfillment issues. But when there are underlying fulfillment issues, you got to do what Bom and Coupang did in Korea. You need to go and build those solutions, because those solutions don't exist for the business. And that is what we are doing everywhere we go, because for these fragmented hotels across the globe, a lot of fulfillment solutions either are clunky and not right fit for them or don't exist at all.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about competitors and partners and how you think about that. Ming, obviously, Uber and Grab have quite the history and are still involved today. What can you tell us to bring us behind the headlines a little bit to help us understand why you think the Grab brand really won out in Southeast Asia?
Just before I address that question, I wanted to go back to the point around using technology to level the playing field on the supply side and helping small SMEs compete with the Hiltons of the world. I think technology can also help on the demand side, on the consumer side. And one of the beautiful things about technology is it makes the services that we all want cheaper every single day. It's a very powerful deflationary force for good. And so particularly in the context of Southeast Asia, India, we're now at a point where the last billion of consumers now have access to nearly the same digital mobile services as the first billion of digital consumers in the US and broader developing market or developed markets. And I think what's very powerful about that notion of the last billion is the realization that many of these consumers, the last billion, are working in the informal economies of the world, similar to what OYO is doing. These are informal workers, they are cash economy company or workers. They don't have a W-2, they don't pay taxes, and because of that, they don't have access to modern financial systems. They don't have access to bank accounts, certainly not credit cards. Capital formation is really very, very difficult for them. And I think companies like all the four of us, I think, are creating the opportunities, whether it's on the supply side or the demand side, to lower the cost, bring these market participants into the formal economies, where they can then benefit from capital formation, capital funding, and supply-side opportunities for everyone. And that includes, obviously, for automotive and e-commerce as well, particularly for the long-tail supply side. So just, I think both sides are very, very important to bring together.
Yep.
On your second question regarding competition, and ultimately, competition is great. We're always fond of saying iron sharpens iron. And the best part of competition is consumers and their expectations of us continue to increase each and every day. If today Bom has 1 million products available same day, next year consumers will expect 2 million, 3 million, 3. Every year the expectation goes higher. And that's an incredibly important part of what we all four of us try and do in our businesses. I would say the key concept for us was being hyper local, and understanding that the best way to address the needs of our consumer is not to change their behavior, but to develop a service that fits into their normal consumer behavior patterns. Don't force a consumer who prefers a $1 motorcycle ride to get into a black car four-wheel. Don't force the consumer that prefers an open-air bus in Manila to get into a Lexus. When you think about the financial services opportunity, don't force consumers to use credit cards. Why? Because most consumers don't have credit cards in Southeast Asia. Less than 45% of consumers in the region have access to even a bank account, much less a credit card. And so rather than forcing that consumer to go along the same journey as the US consumer, banking, credit card, mortgages, create a new flow for that consumer that meets his or her requirements, needs, and solves a real problem. And if you're able to provide and tweak the services to meet that inherent demand, then I think you can build very durable companies that address parts of the market that were structurally, I would say, inaccessible to most companies from a global perspective. But once you unshackle once you unlock that consumer segment, what you find is they're extremely productive, they're extremely consuming, and these are wonderful market segments to be serving.
Bom, can you talk a little bit about how the customer flow, as Ming puts it, is different at Coupang than, say, at Amazon, and what you're doing to make sure that you're not forcing customers to do things they don't want?
We don't really think of, when you say customer flow, you mean just in terms of
Yeah, like in terms of what you mentioned, that there are a lot of orders that come in after 10 p.m. and you guys having to create infrastructure to support that.
Yeah.
Are there other things that are going on at Coupang that you think, can't be replicated or specific to the Korea market that you're serving?
It's interesting. The constraints are different. I think it's interesting to hear about Ming's market's constraints where people don't have credit cards. But oftentimes these constraints, I think Ming was saying that competition is a blessing. I think constraints are a blessing because even though there are unique constraints in our market that have forced us to take on extra challenges beyond what Amazon took on, it's turned out to be a blessing because the solutions that it's led us to, I think, are as applicable in the US market as they are in the Korean market. So we didn't have the luxury of a US Postal Service subsidizing our business. We didn't have the luxury of a UPS. So we had to build our own fleet. That seems like a disadvantage, but it ended up giving us this end-to-end integration, not only in infrastructure but technology, building it up from the ground up. That's now allowed us to do this delivery. And the solution is this. I'll just recount a quick story. A month ago, we had a colleague join us from the US. And in one of our meetings, unrelated, I asked her how she was settling into Korea, Seoul, Korea. And I asked her, how is everything, anything you missed from back home? And she kind of blurted out and got very emotional, and she said, I don't miss Amazon at all. I'm so in love with this company. And at first I thought she was just doing it to flatter us, but she recounted the story about how her daughter was having trouble adjusting to school. And she was so busy settling into a new country, settling into a new job, that she kept forgetting to buy her daughter a ballerina. Her daughter is taking ballet classes at school, and she forgot to get her a ballet uniform or ballet dress, and so her daughter had been practicing in plain clothes, and her daughter had been embarrassed. She's in a new school, she doesn't have friends as it is, and she's practicing in plain clothes, and she had kept reminding her mother that she needed one, and she kept forgetting. And it so happened the day before I asked her this question, her daughter had come up to her in the middle, late at night, and said, "Mommy, did you remember to get me my ballet clothes?" And she had forgotten. She had completely forgotten. And she said, just on the off chance that our Dawn delivery had this product, she checked. And because we carry 2 million products for Dawn delivery, we happened to have a ballet dress in her daughter's size. So she got it before 7 a.m., gave it to her child before she went to school. So I say, look, the constraints that forced us to build this solution are unique to Korea. But who wouldn't want this service anywhere in the world? So I think oftentimes it's not that the solutions are that unique or that applicable only in certain markets. It's that we are all solving for universal human needs. The constraints are different, and constraints are a blessing, just as competition can be. I think Thomas Edison said that necessity is the mother of invention, and it's absolutely true. Except you have to have, the way to win in this market is not by bringing in solutions from other markets and copying and pasting it. That would be like flapping your wings. It's really to take the customer needs seriously, to not bend the customer to fit your solution, but to bend your solution to fit the customer with all the constraints that she has in the market.
Is that little ballerina going to be in your next ad campaign?
No, actually the whole time she was telling me the story, I was thinking to myself, gosh, I wish I were recording this.
Yeah, sounds like a good marketing campaign for you.
As an avid user of Bom service, I'll mention one very clear difference in the customer journey and the customer flow is very creative in use of convenience stores as pickup, drop-off, last mile logistics points. And for me, when I wake up and go to work, the first thing I do is I usually drop off at a convenience store, I pick up my coffee, I think recognizing that that is part of the consumer's daily habit, I think was a very powerful.
Now, can you go one step further? We went and we made 100% of our deliveries to the door. 100%. Because we took it again. Just the constant, I think what takes you to the next level is to not settle, because the customer will never settle. And to just challenge yourself and say, how can you let the customer have it all? Because if the customer has it all, they can't live without you. They'll say, how did I ever live without Oyo, without Grab, without Auto1, without Coupang? And I think if there's a common thread here, we are customer obsessed. We are trying to give them everything. And the way we're trying to give them everything is by using technology and really integrating it end to end.
Abhinav, can you speak a little bit? You talked earlier about the lack of infrastructure in a lot of the hotels that you're partnering with in India. How are you using your product to solve for those needs in a way that is scalable and so customers can have it all?
It's incredible that this question follows what Bom was saying. I think India, lack of infrastructure is basically many constraints which come in because of the environment in which you are building your business. So for example, if you compare the US or the UK and compare it with India, in the US or UK, all the hotels, they don't really worry about what will be the laundry solution for them. There are other companies which are at scale taking care of that problem for you. You don't really worry about training schools because there are formalized training schools from which you get hospitality staff. You need to go in and recruit. You don't really care about cleaning solutions because they exist at the right cost, at the right price, available to everyone, right? When you come to India, and these are just few examples, when you come to India, there aren't many hospitality schools. So as you start building and scaling up, we realize that we will have to go down, and we now run 23 hospitality schools in India. 1,500 people graduate from those schools every month, right? And they get absorbed in the operated business, basically leased business, where we lease and operate hotels. Now, and similarly, we built our own laundry solutions. We have done research and sort of tried to optimize the operating cost of the hotels to a certain degree where these become capabilities which can be then transported, and these can be used to improve existing setup in any country that we go to. Now, as we think about the UK or the US, we know a lot more about hospitality staff training solutions in terms of how do you leverage technology to train people faster, how do you do one-time versus refresher trainings. There's a lot of depth which we bring to the table because of which we are able to really improve the solution that already exists. Now, these are a few differences, but the underlying theme, as Bom rightly pointed out, because of constraints, you are exposed to a rich set of opportunities. And I think add to that, these companies sitting on this table being technology-first companies. So every solution that you bring to these constraints is a technology-first solution. And a lot of economies that we go to have not solved these constraints in a technology-first way. They have a solution which exists, but it is not tech-first or not mobile-first.
All right, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the US market. This year, many are lauding as the year of the unicorn IPO, with a lot of the companies that are in your spaces, but here in the US, rushing to the public markets. Bom, you have an interesting past toying with the idea of going public, as do some of the other panelists on this stage. Why wasn't it the right strategic solution for where you were with the company, and how are you thinking about the private-public tug of war?
I'm not saying this as I'll just speak from my experience. We were at a stage where, at the time, we had built a profitable, fast-growing business, but that hadn't invested in the end-to-end fulfillment, the integration. And as a company that is embarking on a massively transformative investment phase, much like I think Netflix engaged in when it was a pure DVD player, rental business, and was transitioning to a streaming business. I had a lot of trepidation looking at the market as to whether we could navigate that long-term investment easily with public market investors. And this is where I think the private sector has been incredibly helpful to driving innovation for the customer for the long term. SoftBank gave us $1 billion against that vision. And we were able to embark on building, building a long-term play for the customer that we knew was going to be very disruptive, truly transformational for the customer, but taking a profitable business and then making it unprofitable in the short run to try to build that foundation was not something, I think there have been great CEOs like Reed Hastings that have been able to navigate that. I was a little uncertain at the time of my ability to do that, and I'm so grateful that there are long-term, truly, I mean, a lot of investors say that they're long-term, but there are a few investors that really have not only the means to be long-term, but the guts to be long-term, and I certainly feel blessed to be a partner of SoftBank.
And it's worth noting that everyone on the panel has taken quite a considerable check from SoftBank, and they are.
I mean, I would underwrite that, and I think it's the red line here when you see everybody who says, I want to go deeper in the value chain. And I think that is not what the first wave of internet investors, asset-light investors, marketplace-only, app-only investors wanted to see. And now you have companies here in all these different industries that say, I want to go one level deeper because I'm tech first, because I understand how it really scales. But it still costs money. Just because it's tech doesn't mean it's free. And who is willing to really give you the confidence to build that? And I have to agree that when you sit down with Masa and Rajiv and the team, that they really ask you why you're not building it. Yeah, this is the layer, but these are incumbents, and we're good here. And it's like, why aren't you building this? Is this better for your customer? Yeah. Will this pay out on the long run? Yes. Why are you not building this? And I think we've all answered, yeah, why I'm actually not building this, otherwise we'd be sitting here. But it really gives you confidence. It really gives you confidence that you're allowed to build something that's great down to the last level of fulfillment. And that will be last mile for us, where you have your car trucks, there could be refurbishment centers, where you just say, that this is CapEx, but this is CapEx for something that will make it greater for everybody. And not only for ourselves, but opening it for other players on the market. And I think, when you think about logistics and your efforts there, every incremental player who uses your pipeline actually is bringing the incremental cost down.
But to play devil's advocate here a little bit, if the argument is that you need to stay in the private markets in order to be able to create that deep infrastructure and create those experiences that the customer wants, because Wall Street can't handle the short-term fluxes of that and what it might do to the business, customer expectations are always increasing. So when will it be the right time to jump to the public markets if these are constantly things that customers are going to be asking for more and more?
Just to jump in there, I think Rajiv Misra yesterday mentioned it the best. I think SoftBank provides courage to many of its portfolio companies. I don't think Oyo would be in the US without SoftBank. I don't think Bom would have last mile logistics without SoftBank. And for us, I certainly know that the confidence and the support that SoftBank has provided for us to really think about how do you expand your business from purely mobility to a super app platform where now you're becoming a true financial services company. That navigation is extremely difficult to do in the public markets. And I think that long-term investment and the ability to both vertically integrate, invest capital into creating true moats around our businesses and creating marginal improvements and marginal advantages on our margins and our services over time, I think that's a very powerful ability that public companies, frankly, don't have. As to timing, I think we all balance, each of us, the various stakeholders and shareholders in our businesses. We all have early stage investors, we have late stage investors, and there's always a time, right place and right time. But for now, particularly for I think the four of us in massive hyper growth opportunities, I think that time is certainly not necessarily now.
And Ming, talk to us a little bit. Grab is expecting to raise another $2 billion from strategic investors this year. What can you share in terms of the problems that you're hoping to solve with that funding?
Yeah, I think the first, the largest opportunity that we see is, again, taking the informal markets and migrating and unlocking those consumers from the informal markets into the formal markets. And I think the journey from taking a cash consumer who's used to saving his or her savings as cash underneath his or her mattress and converting that into value on your phone, which can then be used across multiple ecosystems, that journey is a very interesting journey for us that requires us to really invest into the opportunities. I'll just mention one of the power of being part of the Vision Fund family is the incredible breadth of portfolio companies that come and bring benefits to each of us. We have a partnership with Oyo on hotel bookings. We have partnerships with Tokopedia on e-commerce. We have partnerships with Ping An on healthcare. And if the notion is to develop a true platform, a real daily super app platform, the last thing we want to do is to do everything ourselves. And the notion of having the entire force and the power of Vision Fund provide best-in-class services, but for ourselves, helping them adapt and localize those services for the local market context. I think that's a very, very powerful, powerful advantage for us.
And Abhinav, yeah, you've been shaking your head a lot. How is Oyo thinking about the potential road in the future to IPO and staying in the private markets?
Yeah, I think something which is most important to acknowledge, every entrepreneur's or company's decision to go down IPO has a lot of variables, right? And the decision is customized to the company, the situation, the opportunities in front, the growth trajectory, the P&L, how that's looking like. So there are a lot of variables. The two things for us, very similar to what everyone is talking about, the two things for us that stand out. One, we not only feel we are faced with this unbelievable opportunity in front of us, where we believe what we have done so far is a fraction of what we could do potentially. And two, it's not just the availability of capital. We are shaping the vision together of how will we move and conquer new challenges which will exponentially create value in the organization. I think public markets, while they are amazing, there are certain attributes of partnership, there are certain attributes of building the vision, which in a private market are easier to get around and easier to focus on. The key for all of us would absolutely be to understand the public markets and keep building the sustainable elements of the business which come with, if you are a public company. So how do you make sure that you are governed with the best principles possible? How do you make sure that you build the highest levels of accountability towards the society, towards your stakeholders, right? So there are a lot of elements which are positive elements which come as part of being a public company. And as long as we are continuously moving and imbibing those elements as well, whether you're public or a private company, at the end of the day, very tactically is a question of where the money is coming from, right? And there are some great private companies as well at this point of time that never went public. So this question, again, it's a question which is very personal to the journey of the company, to the ambitions of the company. But we are all very fortunate that in the journey, we have some really, really unbelievable partners in SoftBank Vision Fund, and Sonsan, and the ability to shape the vision together and the ability to improve the execution over time is something that has to be incredibly valuable as well.
Mm. I want to go back to something that Ming said in his earlier remarks about this notion that Silicon Valley is creating companies and products for rich kids in the Bay Area, and that seems to be working well for them. But it's not working in other markets because other markets are heterogeneous, as you said. But the reality is the market here in the US is very heterogeneous as well. So I would love to get your guys' thoughts on why the approach in the US, I mean, we don't know if it's working, we don't know if these companies are going to make any money, but why that approach in the US, it's scalable at least, and perhaps it isn't in your own markets.
I can start and I can share a few examples of how things are so different in India versus the US. So India basically skipped the desktop generation. Right? 90% of people who have access to internet in India got their first access to internet on their phones. right? That leads to a very, very different set of behaviors that you see in the market. For example, hotel bookings, are still about 45 to 50% on the desktop in this country, right? Whereas in India, about 95% of hotel bookings are happening on your phone, right? So it's a very different attribute altogether. But if you see, this is an average picture of the US, there'll be a lot of variability across the country, we acknowledge, but there are completely different dimensions of variability that get added when you change the geographical setting. And there are many such examples. So there is variability, of course, across geographies, across demographic groups here, but there are new dimensions that get created and added when you jump borders and go to a completely different country.
And Abhinav, you're thinking about expanding into the US. What's the opportunity there for Oyo?
Very happy to see that there is tremendous opportunity. So that's, we have been spending some time here. We are sort of in the pre-launch phase. We see that between 70 and 75% of the assets continue to be independently run. And these are independent entrepreneurs running the hotel, not having access to all the tools and the facilities that we talked about. So there is a tremendous opportunity for us to bring our core capabilities to this market, customize these capabilities so they are very effective in the local ecosystem, solve the needs of the consumers at the economy and the mid-economy segment by creating a better assortment for them through our hotels. But most importantly, look at the real estate owners and solve their problems, allowing them to make more money, higher yield on their assets, and making their life easier through our technology and through our end-to-end platform.
Hakan, I'm going to throw this one to you because I haven't heard from you in a while. Make sure you're still awake. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I think, the US market and why these companies are, if you want so, focused on the US market is that they're also lucky enough that it's a huge market. Yeah? You have a single market that is large enough, you have one jurisdiction, you have one currency, and then, if you want so, agreeing with your term that the constraints actually help. If you have to puzzle your way together and if you have to cope with several jurisdictions, then it's not so hard to incrementally add another one. We do business in over 30 countries, which means, of course, in every country, the law is different and how ownership changed and how transport and paperwork. But if you've done it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, you have an idea, you have a blueprint, you have a checklist of saying, wait a second, in Italy we had these, in Spain we had these challenges. Let's at least have a look how it looks in these other countries. And that is something that is good on the one hand. On the other hand, it can slow you down or cost you more or be more inefficient. And the US startups have the advantage that they sit in one hub where they have access to talent, a lot more access to capital than we in Europe. And a very interesting market. Yeah. So that's why we see a lot of companies being successful and very long staying in the home markets. I think even Amazon, when I look at it, and I couldn't believe it, it's very large, it's a very important player in Germany. How many European countries they were not present in? Even in the beginning of 2010s, 11s, were major markets where they hadn't even moved out. Yeah. So I think that is our advantage, and it's our home turf. That is what we understand, and also protects us from large competition.
Bob, any thoughts over there for why the Silicon Valley way of building products doesn't translate abroad?
I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but really the constraints are different. I mean, I can give another example, which is in our market. The delivery trucks are by law regulated, and they cannot be bigger than about half the size of a UPS truck. So even though we have the benefits of having high density, most Koreans live in packed and high vertical buildings that should lend itself to more efficient delivery, because our trucks are so small, they have to keep going back and get refilled, replenished. And that kills all the efficiency gains that we would have gained from the density. So what we eventually had to do is it forced us to solve that problem by getting rid of boxes. So even for sensitive items like detergents, that we actually, if you, I'm getting into the minutia of e-commerce, but a detergent bottle, if you put it flat on its side and it bumps up and down, it bursts. And we used to call it a liquid bomb. It's one of the most sensitive things. You usually bubble wrap it, put air cushions in a big box. But a box is 30% air. It takes a lot of materials. It's environmentally unfriendly. Consumers hate it because they have all this. Probably you can relate when you order a lot online. You have boxes piling up in the house. So you have to figure out how to recycle. So what we did was we said, okay, we have to figure out how to put more items into this small truck to make sure that we can deliver to customers efficiently. And we designed a process, because we controlled end-to-end, that got rid of boxes for over half of our items. We're now moving closer and closer every day to 100% without boxes, which means even a bottle of detergent doesn't even get bubble wrap around it. And yet our damage rate is lower. Now we can fit more, almost twice the number of items that we could fit in before because of creative ways. And our cost end-to-end is lower. There's no fuel loss from going back and forth. Box material cost is less. Packaging time is much faster when you don't have boxes. And most importantly, customers love it. So these are, again, when you are in an environment that you're blessed with a lack of constraints, that can actually be a curse in the sense that it doesn't force you to invent and innovate beyond for the customer.
I think we have time for one more question, so I'm going to throw up a jump ball here. What didn't we hit on that you think that the audience needs to know before they get on with their Tuesday? It's Tuesday, right? Yeah. Okay, good.
Sorry, can you?
Yeah, I didn't hear the...
What's something we haven't hit on that you think the audience needs to know, either about your company or what the themes that we've been talking about? Anything come to mind? We hit it all?
Good job.
Now we're going to have someone ask a question because you guys didn't have anything to say. Let's do that. Sure. Oh, when you almost gave up. Was there any time? That's a good one.
I'll mention right before our merger with Uber. No, actually, on your first question, I think the questions that should be asked are how will companies like us really address the last billion of consumers in a durable way and helps that last billion achieve the same access to services as the first billion. I think that market opportunity and the specific ways to address that, whether it's on the supply side or demand side, is something that will be quite amazing.
Great. Well, I want to thank my panelists for an amazing discussion, and thank you guys so much for joining us such late in the day. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.